I love Star Wars. I love it so much. I've loved Star Wars since I was 5 years old in 1977 when my father took me to go see what was then just Star Wars at a small movie theater in Rosemead, California. And I was a fan of Star Wars before I was a fan of anything else in my life. And now, 41 years later, I'm 47 years old. Here we are, just a few weeks away from movie number 9 in the saga series of the Star Wars universe. And I'm so excited and so thankful that you come along for this ride every single week. Please recommend the show to a friend. I don't know about you. I've had a really difficult time listening to other Star Wars podcasts because I love hearing other people's thoughts about this universe that's been created for all of us. And I love listening to podcasts. But unfortunately, lately, man, the negativity coming from so many different shows has just really kind of bums me out. And that's not to say people can't be critical. We're critical on this show. I love Star Wars, but I don't love everything about Star Wars. And there's things I don't like. And I keep the show positive for those that have been listening and watching the show for any length of time. But it just bums me out when people get overly critical of this series. It's provided us so much joy. And so I do the show because it's my own little oasis from the negativity in the Star Wars fandom that I can hopefully bring to you and hopefully you enjoy as we all go on this journey and ride together. So please go and share the show with a friend, especially those looking for some positive Star Wars content. I really would appreciate it. We got a lot to get to this week. The bulk of the commentary for the show this week will be these articles from Variety Magazine and Rolling Stone with JJ Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy. There's a lot of great details about the production of The Rise of Skywalker, choices that were made in the storytelling. JJ Abrams talks extensively about Rian Johnson. It's really interesting in that article, too, which we'll get to. The interviewer in the article with JJ Abrams really tries to lead JJ down a path, in my opinion, where he was almost wanting JJ Abrams to talk smack about The Last Jedi. And JJ's, the utmost professional, obviously, didn't go and take the bait. And I'm really looking forward to getting into what was said about The Last Jedi just because I love that movie so much. And a lot of interesting thoughts from Kathleen Kennedy as well on the future of the Star Wars franchise. We have a quote here from Colin Trevorrow, which we'll get into on the show as well, talking about his writing credit on The Rise of Skywalker. And when, in his mind, the return of Palpatine came into the mix. And then we'll get into a ton of listener feedback this week. Let's start off, though, with sort of kind of go through the week of what's happened so far. We did get a new TV spot with some extended footage. We got the sort of the Instagram version of this footage earlier in the week, and it was cropped. And it reminded me of being a kid when I used to watch Star Wars on the small screen, because it wasn't widescreen and the picture was cut. And so when you get this promotional footage coming from places like Instagram, it's like looking at it through that. You don't get the whole picture. But even with that, there were some really amazing shots. The tread speeder blasting across the sand on Pisana, just amazing. The footage that we got overnight that we'll talk about as well sort of expands upon that, and there's some extra details that we'll talk about from this other footage that got released overnight. Also, the shot of Rey escaping some First Order ship with the Millennium Falcon having left the confines of the hangar bay and Rey leaping out of the force field as Kylo Ren and the First Order troopers brace themselves from the energy coming off the Millennium Falcon. And Rey does this leap into space, essentially, for the loading ramp on the Millennium Falcon, with Finn standing there ready to catch her, wearing the signature Millennium Falcon breathing apparatus. I mean, just an utterly amazing shot. And I'm going to keep saying it, and I was actually talking to my wife about this the other day. Every single piece of footage that I have seen from this film I am dying to see play out on the big screen. And like I've said, I can't say that for almost any other movie. You see a trailer, the movie looks good, there's certain scenes, you go, oh, that's cool. But there are other scenes where you go, man, I can't wait to see what happens there. Every single shot that we've seen so far of The Rise of Skywalker has that effect on me. It has that, oh my gosh, I want to see how all of this plays out. Earlier in the week, we started getting a lot of promotional footage and photographs and posters. We got our series of character posters for this movie. And I've never been I don't know, the character posters are cool, but they're not anything that kind of wow me. I more look at the character posters from a design and marketing standpoint, how dynamic are they? And these character posters are pretty cool. If you're watching the YouTube version, obviously you can see them up on the screen. There's not really a whole lot to get into. All of the character posters, we have seen the characters in these particular outfits before. I do sort of like the space starscape background that they decided to use for all these character posters. And I'm just fascinated with the overall marketing scheme of films. I just think that's, it's interesting to me how Disney and Lucasfilm decide that they're going to try to reach out to fans and what they're going to show us and what they aren't. They clearly have been holding a lot of this movie in, right? Even JJ Abrams, and we'll get into this with the interviews, is like, look, man, there's whole action sequences that we haven't even shown or even alluded to in any of the promotional footage so far. And it's funny because that's what I had thought about The Force Awakens. When The Force Awakens came out, I was under the assumption that they would be holding back a heck of a lot more. But when the movie came out, it turns out that pretty much all the different locations in the trailer was pretty much all the locations that we ended up seeing and the major action sequences, just in very small little chunks. And it seems as if you believe what JJ Abrams said, that they actually are holding back major action sequences and aren't even giving you a hint of what they're supposed to look like. I truly believe that this movie is going to be something incredibly special. I feel like there is a level of we're going to go for it with this film. We're going to close out this saga with a bang. You don't have to worry about overdoing it because it is the last movie in this 40-plus-year-old saga. So you can do everything bigger and better than what came before it. That's the expectation. And the feeling that I get from everything that I've read so far and the interviews that we heard and the interview that we'll play for you here coming up on the show is that JJ Abrams really did go for it. He really did. No holes barred. We're going all in on this sucker, and we're going to just see how it plays out. I've been watching the Imagineering series on the Disney Plus app, which is fantastic. Basically 1 hour specials. There's 3 episodes so far, taking you through the inception of Disney, through Walt Disney, and then working its way through the years as the Disney parks developed, Disneyland, Walt Disney World, Tokyo Disney, Euro Disney, Disneyland Paris, and the Imagineering process, that's a part of all of this. And the one that we watched this week zeroed in on when George Lucas got involved in the parks and they made Star Tours, which was interesting because I completely forgot that at that time, obviously Star Wars was not owned by Disney. And yet in the documentary, and I agree, Star Wars and Disney just kind of went together. I mean, it was the same thing with Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones was Paramount at the time, right? It was Paramount or Universal. I think it was Paramount at the mountain, right? And then they did the Indiana Jones ride. The reason I bring this up is because George Lucas had a comment from 1982 when they were working on Star Tours, and he said when he made these stories, he writes stories that he likes and what he wants to see and hopes that other people like it too. I've talked about this before. I've been a talk radio host for 24 going on 25 years, and we had a consultant once, and he really was more of a mentor than anything else. And he talked about the idea of when we do the show and talk about topics on the show, be as authentic and as genuine as you can possibly be Choose the stories that you want to talk to, that you're most interested in, and you'll reach the widest audience you're capable of reaching. And that really is part of the magic of the Star Wars storytelling. And a really good example of it not working fully would be the prequels. The prequels were, obviously all directed and written for the most part by George Lucas. These were things that he liked, and then he wanted to see if other people came along for the ride and liked them too. And for millions of people, we did. But for a lot of people, they didn't. They didn't get the old style of romance and the writing going back to the 30s and the 40s. But to me, that's the charm of those films. You take that idea and then you go to The Rise of Skywalker. And this is what I'm driving at. Is that with The Rise of Skywalker, I really do feel like this was JJ Abrams and Chris Terrio going, we're going to do what we think is rad and hope that the audience comes along with us for the ride. And for me personally, that has me through the roof excited because I really do like what JJ Abrams creates and his sort of what JJ Abrams thinks is cool. I can pretty much guarantee that I'm going to think is cool. Whether it was the Star Trek movies, whether it was Super 8, whether it was Mission Impossible 3, just from a personal standpoint, right? I love The Last Jedi and what Rian Johnson did with that. I consider that movie a masterpiece. But I can't say the same thing about Rian Johnson. I think Rian Johnson has much different taste than I do, especially when it comes to some of the older classic films. I'm looking forward to seeing Knives Out next week. But that being said, I couldn't go and say that everything that Rian Johnson does I'm probably going to like because we have similar tastes. We don't. I am convinced that I have very similar tastes to JJ Abrams. And so far, everything that I've seen of The Rise of Skywalker really reminds me of like when I'm writing my EMBARK books and I go, okay, what am I going to do next? What's going to happen next with Taft and with Katha in my story? I just basically stop down and go, well, what would I want to see happen? If I were watching this film, what action sequence or what would thrill me and delight me? And then I'm off and running and I'm writing. And that's what I feel like JJ Abrams has done with this movie. And it's indicative in the promotional items that we've seen so far. So getting to some things this week, we had the character posters. We got the international poster. And this is the German international poster, and it's much different than the U.S. version, and I almost like this particular poster better, to be honest with you. I won't go into a deep description on it. I just want to point out one thing, because there really isn't anything new. Hux is included on this poster, which is interesting, because we really haven't seen him in any more in any of the promotion so far. But what I thought was really cool, and I doubt it's going to play any kind of big role, but for those of us that love The Last Jedi, on that international poster, there's a little tiny porg off in the corner. And I was really surprised to see that they were going to include that. And I imagine that it's going to be something somewhat off the cuff. It's just going to be something that's in the corner of the, maybe on the Millennium Falcon. Maybe you just see it in passing. It's not going to be something that's going to play any type of major role in the film. I just thought that was really neat that they ended up including a porg on the international poster. Now, a couple of the other posters that I actually liked even more, just because they were more simplistic, was specifically this Dolby Cinema poster. And this Dolby Cinema poster shows this, I guess the only way I can describe it is sort of a faraway up shot looking down, if you will, from space on just hundreds of Star Destroyers. And these are obviously the Sith Star Destroyers because they have their red markings on them. And it's our first good sort of bright look at what these original trilogy Star Destroyers that are going to be in The Rise of Skywalker look like. And then you've got all these Star Destroyers and then just pose little candy corn colored new X-Wing facing off against them. That's it. It's a really powerful poster, in my opinion. Very evocative of the beginning of The Last Jedi, when Poe goes and faces off a single light fighter against the Dreadnought. But I just thought, in terms of dynamic and just being something that's visually striking, that was an amazing-looking poster. There was also a French poster that came out, which was kind of a riff on that. It was more of an outline of the Star Destroyers, and within the outline, you could see Kylo Ren's mask within the outline of the poster. Not quite as cool. I prefer the Dolby one, but still, everything that I've seen so far is just so visually dynamic and appealing. Can you tell I'm excited? I'm so excited right now. While I'm here, because I didn't put this in my notes, and I want to make sure that we touch upon it briefly. I want to talk about Kylo Ren's helmet for just a minute. And this is where I'd be curious to get some of your thoughts. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment on YouTube for next week's show. Speaking of which, this week there's a ton of brand new interviews with the cast as they're making the rounds. And I guess Good Morning America is actually going to have some footage on Monday morning from The Rise of Skywalker. And this is very similar to what they've done in the past. We're probably going to end up getting a scene. We certainly did when it came to The Force Awakens. We got an extended look at the scene of Rey and Poe running for the Millennium Falcon on Jakku when the First Order first attacks at the start of the film. So I expect that we'll have that on Monday as well, a scene from The Rise of Skywalker, and we'll get into all of it on next week's show. But the Hot Toys Kylo Ren figure, there's a video that came out for it, and in the video it shows that Kylo Ren's mask, the red adhesive that holds it together, it pulsates. And I've watched the video, and it's really interesting because we haven't heard anything like this. I remember some leaks a while back talking about there's got to be significance of the helmet being put back together, right? There's no doubt about that. But with it pulsing, what could that possibly mean? Is that just for the toy, or is this a part of the film? And it got me thinking. And I haven't really worked through this a ton, but it just got me thinking. I think we're beyond the Palpatine is inside of the helmet. I don't think that's the case anymore. I thought maybe maybe his essence somehow transferred into an item. We've seen this in the Momin mask in the comic books. I'm kind of beyond that particular theory right now, because it seems as if from everything that we've seen so far and been told, Palpatine's back in the flesh, and he's back in the flesh at the start of this film. But it did get me wondering about this helmet again, and when he has it on and why he has it on. I think the promotional posters are a bit deceiving. I know they show Kylo Ren squaring off against Rey with the helmet on in the posters, but every single image that we've seen so far of the two of them facing off, he doesn't have the helmet on except for the shot on whatever the First Order ship with the white room is, when Rey and Kylo Ren destroy the platform that Darth Vader's crusty burnt helmet is on. In the extended footage that we got this week, the television spot, you get another shot from that particular scene, and you can clearly see, prior to Rey holding the dagger and her lightsaber and Kylo Ren in his helmet with his lightsaber, them striking in and destroying whatever that pedestal was. Okay, you can clearly see that it's Vader's mask. Now, Kylo Ren has his helmet on in that shot from the full teaser trailer. Okay. And I think a lot of people believe that this is a part, and something we've talked about on the show. It's kind of a spoiler, but we've discussed it at length, and it's kind of public knowledge, of these Force flash fights where Rey and Kylo Ren will be Force Skyping like they did in The Last Jedi through multiple locations while they battle, even though they're in two different places, they'll square off together. And perhaps that shot and scene that we saw of them with the burned out Vader mask in that white First Order room is a part of that Force flash fight. Maybe they end up in the Force flash fight on the Death Star 2 with the water, and Kylo Ren has the mask on, and then they actually end up there later in the film. Because my point is, in the promotional images we've seen, the posters, he's got the helmet on, they're squaring off, but we never have seen that in any of the footage. Okay, so why do I bring all this up? Well, let's go back to the pulsing helmet for just a minute. AT-AT Chat pointed out to me that in the very last frame of the full trailer, when it looks like Kylo Ren is reaching out to perhaps use the Force to stop Vader's helmet from falling to the ground, it actually looks like in the last frame that he's reaching up to remove the helmet. Okay. So this theory started to form, and this is not based off of any of the leaks. This is just based off of what we've seen so far. I'm convinced there's something up with that helmet. There's some sort of weird connection with that helmet. Something about the helmet and Kylo Ren are tied together, and him wearing it is some type of burden on him. Perhaps the Knights of Ren want Kylo to come back over to the dark side, and they fuse this helmet back with dark side material in order to bring out the dark side in him. I'm just spitballing here. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that Kylo Ren does remove that helmet. Is there significance of him removing the helmet after that pedestal is destroyed? These trailers, if you go back and watch the other trailers for The Force Awakens and for The Last Jedi, you go back and look at the scenes that they show. And this may be a very obvious statement, but go back and look at the scenes that they show in the trailers. And those scenes are of significance, right? We rarely get a shot that's just sort of a random shot of a camera close in, maybe in the middle of dialogue that doesn't really have any major bearing on the film, right? Usually, the stuff they show in the trailer, they want it to be visually dynamic. They want it to draw you in and look exciting, but they also want to get people talking. All right. So, I would say the most sort of random shot doing that thing with my fingers that you're going to get is maybe like a gathering of a crowd or the Corellian Corvette taking off from the planet, which is probably taking off for the final battle, which is also on that international poster, by the way. So that ship's obviously going to play somewhat of an importance within the film. All right, so I'm wiping out on this. Let me get to my point because we got so much to get to this week. My point is, I believe they showed that shot of Rey and Kylo Ren destroying that monument, if you will, right, of Darth Vader for a reason. They both swiped at it. I don't think that originally I thought, well, maybe they're battling and they're just going nuts and their sabers are just wildly, swinging around and they end up smashing it. No, I'm starting to think they did it together. And I'm wondering if the destruction of that pedestal and Vader's helmet is somehow tied to Kylo Ren's helmet. Is there a connection with Vader's helmet that is drawing Kylo Ren to the dark side, that needs to be destroyed for him to be able to disconnect from the dark side? Which, again, goes back to the destruction of that and then potentially him removing his helmet. One more piece of evidence of this. I'm convinced that in the extended footage shot that we saw this week in the TV spot, and we saw a photograph of this from Entertainment Weekly, about a month ago, of Kylo Ren bracing himself in a First Order hangar, right? Awashed in blue. We now know what happens. The Millennium Falcon is escaping from whatever the ship is. Rey is standing there on the edge in front of the force field. Kylo Ren is behind. He's bracing himself, and then she jumps for the Millennium Falcon. He doesn't have the helmet on, and it's in his hand. I'm wondering if somehow in the course of that battle, there is the beginning of the change of Kylo Ren and leading towards redemption. Starts with him removing the helmet, continues with him letting Rey go. Kylo Ren is standing there bracing himself, and you assume he's bracing himself in that hangar from the jet wash, if you will, of the Millennium Falcon taking off. But what if he's actually assisting in some way? What if he's actually helping Rey get off that particular ship, knowing that the First Order troopers would probably be coming after her? This movie is filled with scenes with Rey and Kylo Ren. The promotional footage that we've seen so far is heavy on the Reylo. One of the individuals that I've talked about quite a bit on Twitter who I believe is involved in production somehow and uses this ghost account to sort of get out her fandom without spoiling anything. And I assume it's a she, so they put out that they counted at least 7 different scenes different scenes involving Kylo Ren and Rey. I think the progression of this film is going to be that continuation of The Last Jedi, Rey dealing with a temptation to the dark side, Kylo Ren dealing with his inevitable redemption to the light side, and the both of them figuring out the balance at the end of the film. That's what I think is happening here. And every single altercation that happens between Kylo Ren and Rey is going to be the yin and yang of that. It's going to be Rey dealing with her dark side angst and trying to get control of it because she's generally filled with the light, and Kylo Ren bringing himself to the light because he's generally filled with the dark side. And every single confrontation is going to be a working out of that relationship throughout the film. That's the vibe that I'm getting. I also think that this is why Colin Trevorrow was removed from directing this movie. In one of the articles that we talked about, and we'll get into this in just a moment, Kathleen Kennedy talks about Trevorrow, but specifically Trevorrow had some very interesting things to say about what he wanted to do for Episode 9 and what he had Rian Johnson do for 8. Let me share with you the quotes, and then we'll get to the JJ Abrams interview and these interviews from Variety Magazine and Rolling Stone. So, interesting quotes from Colin Trevorrow on his The Rise of Skywalker writing credit and his The Last Jedi contribution. So, Colin Trevorrow said this: "I'm not sure anyone who chooses the creative life should expect things. But I'm grateful to JJ Abrams for embracing some of our ideas. It's exciting that fans will get to see the moments that felt essential to all of us." And I think that there are from a production standpoint, I think there are things that have gone into production and artwork that was done and perhaps pre-production that was done on a lot of different items that JJ Abrams ended up rolling into The Rise of Skywalker, right? I think things like the Sith Troopers and perhaps vehicles. We know that at Galaxy's Edge, the TIE Echelon that is on display at Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland was supposed to be, it may even still be, but that came from Colin Trevorrow. Okay. Then he goes on to say this: "Bringing back the Emperor was an idea JJ brought to the table when he came back on board," Trevorrow says. "It's honestly something I never considered. I commend him for it. This was a tough story to unlock, and he found the key." A lot of people have been making hay about this particular comment. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. What people are saying is that this shows that Palpatine wasn't the idea from the get-go. And honestly, we don't know if that's the case. J.J. Abrams could have had the idea for Palpatine all along. Could have shared that with Rian Johnson at the time, but they still left it up to the writers and the directors to go and craft their own story and make it their own. This last comment, though, is the most interesting one. I just asked Ryan, talking about The Last Jedi, this is Colin Trevorrow, I just asked Ryan if he could include a little moment where Rey and Poe meet for the first time, he says. They're such beloved characters. It felt right for them to have some history in the next movie. I thought the way he did it was perfect. Okay. This is incredibly telling to me. And it's incredibly telling to me because the scene that he's talking about is that moment when they meet at the end of The Last Jedi on the Millennium Falcon after they leave Crate. I know there are listeners to this show who have been shippers of Rey and Poe, right? And who really wanted to see that play out. And they pointed to that particular scene. What's interesting is that I think they were wrong. I don't think that was going to happen. I think that was Colin Trevorrow's vision, and I think that's one of the reasons why he didn't get to do Episode 9. I'll get to that in a second. But anybody who thought that based off that scene was completely justified in doing so. Because for me, that scene was always it stuck out. Every time I watched The Last Jedi, that meeting between Poe and Rey, I'm Rey, I know, and then Rey smiling at him, you just went, wow, there is something there. And I think the something there was the fact that Rian Johnson was told, hey, I'd like a moment between these two. Can you give it to me? And Rian Johnson probably directed them to go, hey, we may play with this in the next movie, so you both should be delighted to see each other. Because I think it actually goes against some of the canon, And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment on YouTube. But I'm pretty sure in some of the ancillary material, Rey and Poe do meet already. And that kind of pushes back against the canon of some of the written material or the comic books. But that scene I always thought was stuck out. Because you don't see Rey smiling all that often throughout the movies. And she's got a big smile anyways, but she's got one of the biggest smiles ever in that particular shot. If you asked me, I think that Colin Trevorrow wrote a movie for episode 9 that didn't go down the Reylo route. I think that episode 9 was probably going to be something closer to, say, Return of the Jedi, but definitely with Kylo Ren being the big bad and not having any sort of Reylo dynamic between Rey and Kylo Ren. And I'm not trying to open up a can of worms here, but I almost feel like the version of episode 9 that Colin Trevorrow wrote is the version that a lot of those in the fandom would have liked to see based off of their dislike, for lack of a better word, of The Last Jedi. And my guess is Kathleen Kennedy saw that particular script and went, that's not really what we want to do with this particular trilogy. The core story here are these dual protagonists of Rey and Kylo Ren, and that Colin Trevorrow clearly wanted something in there to steer it that direction. Probably wrote a movie that was closer to a Poe Dameron and Rey than it was a Poe Rey or Dam Rey or whatever you want to call it, than it was a Reylo. That's just my 2 cents. I thought it was an interesting quote, and it certainly does lend interesting context to that scene, which, again, always stuck out to me when watching The Last Jedi, because that moment, people chalk it up to just how much charisma and how, and just how charismatic Oscar Isaac is. I think that's part of it, but don't knock Rey either. She's got some charisma as well, and those two together in that particular scene certainly showed it. All right, so we're getting a lot of interviews and commentary about the future of the movies, and also the production going into and the thought process going into The Rise of Skywalker. Entertainment Weekly put out a series of interviews with Rey and with Daisy Ridley, and Oscar Isaac and Kelly Marie Tran. I'm just going to play you one particular piece of audio from JJ Abrams because I thought it was interesting. First off, these interviews, for the most part, we've already heard some of the more important points from, because these were all done back at Celebration. A lot of people picked up on the fact that the clothes that they're wearing in these videos are the same clothes they were wearing at Celebration, and clearly it looks as if a lot of the articles that have been written since April until now were based off of these interviews. But here's what JJ Abrams had to say about working on the Rise of Skywalker, the production process, and the movie itself.
Shooting this movie has been a wildly satisfying and gratifying experience. And the cast and the crew brought a kind of commitment to this that I actually hadn't quite seen ever before.
I think rightly so in episode 8, the characters have to kind of separate to then find who they are, to come back together and complete this mission. And now the cast are back together. It helps us as an ensemble. We get to share the load and we get to have fun.
Everyone is sort of coming together and everyone's playing a part in a really cool and special way.
The most important thing for Chewie is that everyone's back together again. I don't think if he would just be left on his own, I don't think he'd know what to do, because he's always had to take care of these humans who seem to get him into trouble, all kinds of trouble.
And I think a lot of the things that people enjoyed with 7, the dynamics between the 3 and the banter, the fun, the arguments, we get to explore that much more in this film, so that's always exciting.
And I think that's also why the 3 of us in particular feel so connected to each other.
We always look for that core group to kind of arrive at solidarity in a decision, and we got to that on this pretty quickly.
Chewbacca is just ready for the new adventure.
Oh, sorry. Really, it's very good. You'll like it.
We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
Lando Calrissian is a character that I feel very, very close to. And it was probably one of the best things that could have happened to me at this juncture in my life.
It's great to have him Billy D. Williams does such a great job in playing the King of Smooth. I can't describe how happy I was to read that he was going to be back.
You know, he looks really, really cool as Lando coming back. And I always love Lando. I like the charm. I love the swagger. And the fact that the guy still got it. That's dope. I hope he had as much fun as us, because he always looked like he was. But, you know, a lot of the time were just making comments about him, just about how cool he looked, how snazzy his walk was.
It's the whole Star Wars experience feels like it never goes away. It's always there.
We realized very early on there was no way that we could tell the story without Leia. And the idea, obviously, of recasting her was something that we would never think of.
It's just a really strange thing, like JJ's touched on it as well, because it was always meant to be her film.
And saying that she had passed away or something, or she was off somewhere, felt like a cheat. And it was a real problem. And then I remember that we had these scenes that we hadn't used, and it was like finding this impossible answer to this impossible question.
And the fact that they had as much footage as they have, it just is so strange. Honestly, I think people watching it are going to think that she was there and we did it in situ for that particular... It's the strangest thing.
It was like the gift of the gods, and we suddenly had, in like a classic Carrie way, these amazing moments.
It's strange because all of the stuff that Carrie did fits eerily into the story.
She's just not with us anymore, and so the fact that she's not here today and we're not able to like have her be part of this ridiculous, you know, experience is sort of doubly heartbreaking.
It will be a very emotional but also very sort of fulfilling ending.
We'll always be with you. No one's ever really gone.
As JJ said, this is sort of the film that ends all films.
and endings were the thing that, you know, frankly, scare me the most.
As Yoda would say, there's great responsibility that goes with doing this, and I think that we all take that seriously.
The fact that this is just the culmination of a 42-year epic opera, and we got to be part of telling a little bit of that story and telling the conclusion of that story. It's just such an astounding thing.
And I think it's a fitting chapter to the end of 40 years of Star Wars. I couldn't think of a better ending than what we're about to get from the Rise of Skywalker.
So going into this thing, knowing this had to be an ending, and we're not screwing around. So this was about bringing this thing to a close in a way that was as emotional and as meaningful and also as satisfying in terms of actually being something that can answer questions as possible.
It's a very good ending. And a good ending feels right.
My Nerd World.
Okay, so I was under the impression that was just the interview with JJ Abrams, but hey, you got a bonus and you got all the cast members there, and what that ended up being was a culmination of all of the different Entertainment Weekly interviews that were done, put into 1 4-minute and 30-second soundbite. Let's take that though and move over to this lengthy interview. And I think I keep saying no, it is Variety. It's Variety magazine with JJ Abrams, because he talks a lot. It's called The Secrets. The article's called The Secrets of Skywalker. One more quick thing, and then we'll dive into this and get to your listener feedback and talk a little Mandalorian. But just a couple of things about the new footage that came out I want to geek out for just a moment about. There is another shot of Kylo Ren in the television spot, where if you go back to the original teaser trailer, where Kylo Ren is on this planet in some forest awashed in red, and he takes out this advancing individual with his lightsaber and throws him to the ground. There's another shot from wherever that same planet is of Kylo Ren like knifing somebody and holding him up with his saber while he's using the Force to push somebody else back. Just an incredible shot. And everything just looks amazing. Also, we got another view in both of these spots of the tread speeder. And this is funny, and then I'll get into this article. This is just from a personal standpoint, because I love vehicles. So the tread speeder, I hadn't quite figured out yet, right? It looks cool. Living here in Minneapolis, it reminded me of a sort of a reverse snowmobile, where they have the track in the back, right, and then they have the skis in the front, and the tread speeder's got the track in the front, and it looks kind of like an oppressive snowmobile. Like if somebody could make a snowmobile like that, it would be awesome. But I always thought it was a little bit weird. But what a weird thing. I mean, you've got repulsor lifts. Why do you need this tread speeder? Well, in the spot that came out over the weekend, Well, okay, so the spot that came out earlier in the week, there was a shot of the tread speeder just barreling across the sand. You could see a jet trooper on the back. And I was like, oh, okay, this is making a little bit more sense. These tread speeders are being driven by by one individual, and on the back you got a first order jet trooper. So he's jumping off and flying away. That makes sense. Then we get the spot overnight that shows another angle of the tread speeder, and on the toy, they didn't make a tread speeder yet for like the vintage collection. They only have it in the Galaxies of Adventure toy line. If you buy a 3 3/4 inch vintage collection first order trooper, it's actually sized better for the Galaxy of Adventure tread speeder than it is the actual Galaxy of Adventure first order trooper that comes with it. Okay. But there's a mechanism where the tread speeder pops up for the toy. And I'm like, they put in the playability factor on these things often. And so it really kind of stuck out to me. I was like, well, that's weird. Yeah, it must be just sort of a play factor. Oh, he crashes. No, it turns out that's actually what the speeder does. If you watch the trailer, the speeder actually bucks and throws the jet trooper into the air. It really was totally rad. I was just like, wow, that's cool. And again, this just goes back to this idea of JJ Abrams and Chris Terrio, and what has me so excited that, man, these guys are just like, what do we think is cool? Doesn't have to make sense. But what do we think is rad? We'll put it in. Hopefully everybody is going to come along for the ride. And as I say often, I'm here for it. All right. So, some stuff from JJ Abrams and The Secrets of Skywalker, the writer and director on the challenge of ending the saga, fan criticism, and respecting George Lucas's vision. Just as with The Force Awakens, you have a tighter deadline than you might have wanted. Did you have a better sense of how hard this would be? And JJ Abrams says, I don't know if I knew exactly, but this one is so much more ambitious than the first one. How so? It's an ending, not a beginning. It's the end of not just one trilogy, but 3. It's a far larger movie in terms of scale. Narratively, there's much more going on everywhere I look. Visual effects, more moving pieces. It's the most challenging thing I've ever been involved in by a lot. It's been breakneck from the time that Kathy called me, and trying to figure out the what and the why and the how has been challenging. But you don't want to go thinking, I got this, because then you're screwed. Why does this have to be the end of the Skywalker saga? They go on to say. I felt like going into this one, even on episode 7. I don't remember if this was discussed or not, but I felt like this was the final trilogy. I felt like it earned being the conclusion of that story. Who's to say what comes next? Is there something else to be done that involves any of these characters? I'm working on nothing Star Wars related, so I'm not hinting at anything. I'm just saying who's to know, but it just felt like the end. There was a certain amusing irreverence in Rian Johnson's approach to The Last Jedi. He subverted some of what you set up. Snoke seemed like a major villain, for instance, and then he killed him off. JJ says this, and this is where the article writer, in my view, tries to lead JJ Abrams down a particular path, and JJ Abrams doesn't bite. He says, when I read his first draft, it made me laugh because I saw that was his take and his voice. I got to watch cuts of the movie as he was working on it as an audience member, and I appreciated the choices he made as a filmmaker that would probably be different from the choices that I would have made, just as he would have made different choices if he had done episode 7. What surprised you most in what he did? And JJ says, I felt the biggest surprise was how dark Luke was. That was the thing I thought, oh, that was unexpected. And that's the thing The Last Jedi undeniably succeeds at, which is constant subversion of expectation. The number of things that happened in that movie that aren't the thing you think is going to happen is pretty fun. And that's a really difficult road to go down. I've had a few people tell me when it comes to my EMBARK science fiction series, they're like, well, it seems pretty predictable. Well, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You either go down a road and kind of lead to an inevitable conclusion, or you try to go and subvert those expectations. I've tried to do more mysteries, more finding things out that you didn't know before rather than subverting of expectations. But I'll be honest, and as I've said, I love that about The Last Jedi, that subversion of the expectations. How did all those unexpected plots affect where you brought the story? JJ says, I had a real sense with The Force Awakens co-screenwriter Larry Kasdan about where things would go, potentially. And I think that when I read Ryan's script, what I felt was that with everything that happens in that movie, and quite a lot does, nothing sort of obviated a sense of inevitability of where I thought the story would go. What was your process like with your co-writer on this movie, Chris Terrio? And JJ says, as much as I read some books and watched some of the animated series and read some stories, Chris's level of knowledge really was as close as you could get to Pablo Hidalgo, the guy at the Lucasfilm Story Group, who's sort of like the vault of Star Wars information. But the process has really just been as one might expect. Talking through the story, finding things that make us emotional, and going with our gut as best we can. Listening to critiques and criticism and trying to make it better as we go. Not afraid of the better idea. Usually we talk through a scene and then we'll each go off and write different scenes and then share them and then do passes on each other's scenes and come up with something. And he's been great, not just in the writing of the movie, but during the movie and even in post, helping to make it better, losing things that we keep trying to make work but don't, and realizing, let's just cut it. So he's here now, he's actually downstairs, JJ Abrams said. I suppose I probably could have cut that out of the article. Star Wars arrived a few years after Nixon's resignation in the Vietnam War. This new trilogy arrives in troubled times. And I like what JJ Abrams had to say here, because, again, I think the article writer was trying to lead JJ down a particular path. He says, certainly politically you can find parallels, but in terms of movie going, it's a very different moment. But I don't know if it's ever a bad time to have something that feels honest and hopeful at the same time. You gave a now famous TED Talk. I love this, by the way, where you spoke about stories as mystery boxes, based on an actual, still unopened mystery box your father gave you. How does that fit with a movie like this? An ending where you have to show all of your cars. This mystery box thing has driven me nuts forever, because I always felt like, and this is confirmation of that people took that out of context. I never took JJ Abrams' mystery box as, we gotta keep everything secret, it's a mystery box, we can't let anybody know everything. No, I took it as what JJ Abrams says in the article. He says this, it's not a driving force at all. I'm not actively thinking, how do I employ a mystery box strategy to this story? What I meant was just that a good story makes you want to understand what's going on, what makes it tick, what's inside. And it was my friend and talented producer, Brian Burke, who, when I was trying to figure out what the hell I was going to talk about at the TED Talk, he said, why don't you talk about that mystery box you have? So the article writer, or the interviewer says, so the whole thing has become widely overblown in your narrative? He says, well, I never think about it. So whenever someone brings it up, I'm always like, oh yeah, that thing. It's not to say that I still don't feel like good stories that forces you to ask a question, but an ending needs to be, by definition, conclusive. I keep imagining a kid watching these 9 movies 100 years from now, so there needs to be a sense of inevitability and continuity to it. But again, if you're not having fun, if you're not at least trying to be delightful, you're doomed. So there are things in the movie that I think might be crazy, but they are some of my favorite things. And whether people accept them is up to them. Rey has a whole fan base of her own. What was the original idea behind the character? The idea was to tell the tale of a young woman who is innately powerful, innately moral, innately good, but also struggling with her place in the world, and forced to fend for herself in every way. As exciting as it was to get to play in the Star Wars universe, it was this young woman that I felt oddly compelled to get to know. Even at that very first meeting with Kathleen Kennedy, the idea came up about having a female at the center of it. One criticism of The Force Awakens is that you stuck closely to the elements of the first trilogy, but that was sort of the point in some ways, wasn't it? And JJ says this, I completely get the criticism, and for those who found it too much of an overlap, I say, I totally hear you and respect the review, but the idea was to continue the story and to begin with this young woman who felt like Luke Skywalker was a myth, and to tell a story that was not just history repeating itself, but a story that embraced the movies that we know as the actual history of this galaxy. Another criticism from older fans is that these movies aren't really about the original heroes. It certainly could have been their story, but I felt like JJ says the way to use them was to be in support of a new story. And the great thing about Star Wars fans is they care so much. And even those who are the most cynical or the most negative are still people who, for the most part, embrace what's being done, even just for fodder for debate. All I can say is that the main characters in this trilogy felt naturally connected to those characters that came before it. In Bob Iger's book, the interviewer asks, he reveals George Lucas's dissatisfaction with The Force Awakens. How do you feel about that then, and how do you feel about it now? He reveals that he says, I've only had gratitude for George. It probably is a complicated thing for him to decide you're going to sell this thing that you created, that was your baby, to anyone. That must be more complicated than signing a check and smiling about it. But he's been incredibly gracious. He's been super generous. He came over. We had a meeting when we first started working on this new movie. And Kathleen Kennedy actually mentioned this at length as well, this meeting that they have, where they took a ton of notes from George Lucas. I think there's a lot of George Lucas in this film. We talked through a ton of different ideas and stories and heard from him about what was important. And we've done nothing but try to adhere to some fundamental aspects of the story. It wasn't a difficult thing to try to do. And again, he was really gracious. So I'm only grateful. I do wish The Force Awakens had been his favorite movie of all time. Yeah, I do. I only wanted to do well by him. But I would just say that I have nothing but profound respect for that guy, and I am still truly, even more so now, working on these movies in awe of what he created. And then he goes on to say this last thing, and then we'll get to the Kathleen Kennedy article and your listener feedback. He says, one thing you hear from people is that the character Rey feels preternaturally gifted. Rey feels really gifted, right? It's the Mary Sue argument. Even for a Jedi, that she learns things faster than, say, Luke Skywalker ever did. Yeah, this is JJ Abrams. Yeah, spooky, right? Then he smiles. It's a fair point. It's not by accident. Yeah. Rey is special, and Rey is special for a very particular reason, and we're going to find out why in The Rise of Skywalker. All right, a couple of things from Kathleen Kennedy, and then we'll move over to listener feedback and talk a little bit about the Mandalorian. Jurassic World director Colin Trevorrow was slated to write and direct Episode 9 before you brought JJ Abrams back. Is this final entry in the trilogy a particularly hard nut to crack? Kathleen said this, every one of these movies is a particularly hard nut to crack. There's no source material. We don't have comic books. We don't have 800-page novels. We don't have anything other than passionate storytellers who get together and talk about what's the next iteration might be. We go through a really normal development process that everybody else does. You start by talking to filmmakers who you think exhibit the sensibilities that you're looking for, and I would argue that the list is very small. People who really do have sensibilities of these kinds of movies, and then the experience and the ability to handle how enormous a job these movies are. Okay. A lot of people took umbrage with this comment from Kathleen Kennedy, and I just want to address this right here. Because a lot of people were ticked off talking about how we do have a ton of movies. We have the comic books, we have the Legends, we have the Expanded Universe, we have the Yuuzhan Vong, we have the Thrawn trilogy, we have all the stuff that's now Legends. Okay, that's not what she's talking about. What she's talking about is Lord of the Rings. What she's talking about is Game of Thrones. What she's talking about is Harry Potter. Star Wars is doing the same thing that the MCU did. The MCU had a ton of material, too, in the comic books that have been written, right? But they haven't done one-to-one variations of those books. They've done iterations of them, of the comic books. They've taken elements and storylines from those books, and then they've spun from there. That's the same thing that Disney has been doing with Lucasfilm and the Legends. They've been taking things from Legends and from the Expanded Universe and building movies on it. What Kathleen Kennedy meant with this comment was that they don't have a series of books like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and Game of Thrones and Harry Potter. That's the big, big difference. I'm going to hold off on a majority of what's left in this particular Kathleen Kennedy article for next week's show, just because I'm looking at the clock, and I want to make sure that we get everything in the time, and the show doesn't go too long this week. So I'm going to save some of this article for next week's show, and along with a lot of your listener feedback, too. There's a ton of listener feedback, and I'm going to get to as much of it as I can this week. But again, I'm going to save some of this stuff for next week as well. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to The Rise of Skywalker on next week's show. I just want to take a moment and remind you to drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can also leave me a comment on YouTube as well. We always try to get to as many of your listener feedback, comments, and questions as we can on every single show. Once we wrap up listener feedback this week, I will be talking a bit about The Mandalorian in the first 3 episodes. And again, I'm doing that for those that don't want to be too spoiled if you're a fan of the show, a friend of the show from overseas.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can also leave a comment on YouTube. And there is a website, mynerdworld.net. You can find out about the EMBARK books that I write there, the podcast there as well. There's bios, there's artwork for the covers for my books as well, all available at mynerdworld.net. All right, first comment, and there are several comments about The Mandalorian here, but again, I'll keep it somewhat spoiler-free if I can. Luna Gur writes this: regarding The Mandalorian, I'm on the same page as you, and I'm the same age as you, and it bores me. I need to watch the first 2 again because I'm clearly missing something. I also did not watch the Clone Wars, and so I haven't quite defined Dave Filoni like so many have. I'm very interested, though, in the points you've brought up regarding the clone patch, etc., and I will have to watch the episodes again with those things in mind. The Mandalorian is interesting, and I can understand why some people may not be getting it. I've been hearing from a lot of friends of mine who know that I'm a massive Star Wars fan, who are through the roof overjoyed with The Mandalorian and calling it the best Star Wars that Disney has made so far. I think I know where that's coming from. That's coming from this angle that they want that same sort of nostalgia fuel and the vibe that the original trilogy gave them. And that's definitely what The Mandalorian does, and does really well. It is very different storytelling. It's slow. It's very slow in terms of pace than what you get in a major motion picture. And I'm totally okay with that. It's a different type of Star Wars than the saga films are. So I could understand why, one, people love it and think it's the best Star Wars that they've made so far, and why other people are like, it's just okay. Art is incredibly subjective. I've talked about it a ton. Like what you want, what you want to like. Don't like what you don't want to like, and don't watch it, but don't tear other people down. And this person certainly didn't. I'm just doing my PSA. Don't go and tear other people down just because they like something that you happen to go and hate. All right. Christina Bracken writes this: in response to your comments about the Mando release dates and The Rise of Skywalker, I recall that Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had connections to and from Thor the Dark World. Viewers didn't need that information for the movie, but viewers of both got the connections. Yep. And again, I still do, and we'll talk a little bit about this at the end of listener feedback this week, because I want to dive into a bit of that Mandalorian lore that we've been introduced to so far. John Dean writes this: Jon Justice, my nerd world, your voice is so soothing. I'm going to put this on low volume when I'm falling asleep. I'm being serious in case you think I'm joking. Hey, man, you listen to the show however you want to listen to the show. I will not stop you. I'm glad that you enjoy it, even if it is just to go and put yourself to sleep. I am totally fine with that, and I hope you sleep tight. Jared Dean Music writes this: okay, since I'll ask you, since nobody else will answer me. Did anyone else think the Mando blacksmith lady sounded suspiciously like Sabine's mom from Rebels? And in one of the trailers, you hear a woman say to the boy, "This is the man that will protect us." I originally thought she was talking about the Mandalorian, but now you can see it's a flashback, and I think she's referencing Obi-Wan protecting the Mandalorian as a boy. That second part is interesting. The first part, I'll answer. It's not Sabine. We know that for a fact, simply because there is another actress that is playing that particular character. And in terms of the timeline, Sabine would be off to, and this is a bit of a spoiler alert if you haven't seen Rebels, but Sabine would be off with Ahsoka at this point in the Star Wars timeline on an adventure. We'll just say that. So she wouldn't be around in this moment during the Mandalorian. All right, Rebecca writes this. "Hey, thanks for reading my comment. Sorry if I sound a little strong sometimes. I miss the words. I love your channel, and I found 2 friends here. By the way, Reylo is Endgame." Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate it, and glad that you liked hearing your comment. All right, JW writes this, friend of the show. "I'm not sure how I feel about Ryan having his own studio. And I don't like that Carrie Hart is leaving Lucasfilm to work for Ryan. She was a good part of the story group. On another note, I like your reference to Meatloaf. Rey will do anything for love, but she won't do that." To the first point, and I commented on this when the post went up from JW. So we talked about this on last week's show. Carrie Hart was one of the members of the Lucasfilm story group. She had already left Lucasfilm. She had already this happened earlier in the year. So I don't know of any direct connection between her leaving Lucasfilm and joining Rian Johnson. It sounds to me like she left Lucasfilm, and then Rian Johnson subsequently went and scooped her up after she left Lucasfilm. So she would have left Lucasfilm regardless of whether or not Rian Johnson has started his own production company, like JJ Abrams and his bad robot. Oh, speaking of which, this is one item that I have not had the chance to get to on the show that I forgot to talk about earlier, but since I'm here, I'll get to it. So Kathleen Kennedy had said that there was going to be a 2022 movie in December of that year. A director has been chosen. It'll be announced in January. Not going to be Rian Johnson. Not going to be Kevin Feige. Here's what I think they're going to do. I think that Disney is... Who the director is, I don't know. Probably somebody attached with The Mandalorian. Maybe even Dave Filoni, potentially Jon Favreau, since he should be out of production for The Mandalorian by then with enough time to go and do a new movie. Here's what I think Disney is going to do and what I think they should do. In starting over with a brand new saga, they should do one movie and see how it works with the potential to go from that movie forward. So whether that is an Old Republic film, whether that is a film that goes further into the timeline past The Rise of Skywalker, treat the next theatrical Star Wars release. Treat that like George Lucas did A New Hope. And make it one movie, one singular story. And if it works, and if people love it, then that's your saga. And if it doesn't, then it's okay. Try something else. That's what I want Disney to do. Don't announce a trilogy. Don't announce a new saga movie. Just say, hey, this is the movie coming up. This is where it is set. This is a rough idea of what the story is going to be. So let's say it's The First Jedi. And we're going to make it a one-off. And then leave just enough at the end to go, if everybody goes, yeah, man, I want more, there's your new saga. That's what they need to do. All right, back to your comments. Junie Junebug writes this. Hey, John, my name is John as well. I just had some feedback, and maybe other people can agree or maybe not. I've been watching and listening for about 3 months now. Disney Plus isn't available because I'm currently overseas serving. Thank you for your service. But as much as I want to watch The Mandalorian, I can't, so at the moment, I just don't want to hear about it, so maybe you could do a different podcast for The Mandalorian and The Rise of Skywalker. Maybe that's just me, even if you don't do separate podcasts. Even just timestamps in the description would be nice. Thank you, and keep up the good work. Thank you, John. I appreciate it. And that your comment is exactly the reason why I had decided to move the commentary of The Mandalorian to after listener feedback this week. So thank you for your feedback. All right, Guitar Did says this. I don't think it's a theory to say that Imperial Doctor had the Kamonian Clone Center patch on his shoulder and wants Baby Yoda for cloning. No, not a theory. I guess it's more, and I think I probably said that on last week's show, it's more just a matter of what the reason is. And we'll get into this again after when we talk a little bit of Mandalorian. I see what you're saying. It's not a theory. He obviously is wearing a Kaminoan patch, and they are synonymous with cloning, so clearly that's something that's involved here. It's just why they want to clone. All right. R. Doraith says this. I admit, Mandalorian got me. Such beautiful cinematic storytelling. The silence, the landscape, the mythic naming convention. The Mandalorian, the child, the sin. I feel like a child at the feet of a master storyteller. Yeah, man, I'm glad you're digging it. I know I'm digging it. All right. What do we have next this week? Let's go here. Hello, Jon Justice. I am Everson, and I love your videos for man reasons. Maybe it was main reasons. But if it's man reasons, I'll take it. I really believe that some of it is due to the fact that you are a positive light in the middle of the darkness that is the Star Wars fandom online. Darkness rises and the light to meet it. Also, I wanted to know, what is your favorite track from the Star Wars soundtrack? My favorite is Anakin's Dark Deeds, which just explodes into my ears with the choir. Love from Brazil, Everson. Boy, that's tough. I love Rey's theme. I love Yoda's theme. And I really do love the Luke and Leia theme from Return of the Jedi. I think the Luke and Leia theme from Return of the Jedi is looked over quite often when it comes to some of the master strokes of John Williams and what he's created. That theme is really incredible, in my opinion. And I love how I love the crescendo that it builds to. It's just amazing. All right, I'm going to wrap up the show here because the next two comments that I have in the email are very specific to The Mandalorian, and we'll get into a little bit more of it coming up with a Mandalorian talk. So I will just say thank you so much for checking out the show. If you're bailing now and you haven't had a chance to watch The Mandalorian and don't want me to get into, or don't want to hear me talk about spoilers, as always, subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you go, and subscribe and like on YouTube. Wherever you go and listen to podcasts, subscribe there as well. You can always email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Also, remember my science fiction space opera books. You can go and pick them up right now at Amazon.com. And one more last plug, and then we'll get into Mandalorian talk. I want to mention the Blaster app. The Blaster app right now, it is a social networking audio-based app where you can post your voice just like you would post and write a tweet on Twitter. You can post your voice directly to the Blaster app or to Twitter as well. It's available just for iPhone right now. The Android version is in development, and it's free. Go to the App Store, search for Blaster app, all one word, and download it. You can find me there under Jon Justice and also under My Nerd World. I'm doing blasts almost every single day. Not just for my radio show, but also Star Wars related. So a lot of commentary as news and stuff breaks throughout the week. I post them up. I post little Blaster casts on Twitter and on Facebook and on the Blaster app. So go to the App Store, get it, download it. It's all free. It takes you just a few minutes to set your profile up. And you can hear further commentary from this show and go and provide your own commentary as well. Again, go to the App Store, search for Blaster app, all one word. The website, theblasterapp.com. And follow me there as well, Jon, Jon Justice, and My Nerd World. All right, I'm not going to officially end the show. I'm just going to say goodbye now to our overseas friends that don't want to have Mandalorian spoilers as we get into Mandalorian spoilers.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
It goes without saying that I've really been loving The Mandalorian. It's very different Star Wars, right? Slow down, takes its time, but that's what you can do with television shows that you can't do with a major motion picture. I think Chilota is the most adorable thing that Star Wars has ever produced, even beyond Porgs. Chilota is just an incredible, imaginative piece of storytelling and is just so utterly adorable. I could watch, like people put up the fireplace videos through it, when they don't have a fireplace and they just watch the logs burn. I could watch just Chilota walking around chasing frogs, pointing at things, trying to heal things with his 3 little fingers. I love Chilota. All right, friend of the show, Anthea Gaia writes this. I just finished watching both of the first 2 episodes of The Mandalorian. Wow, I was impressed. Before watching, I didn't know what to expect since they hadn't really given us that much info about what the story was about. The big reveal at the end of episode 1 definitely wowed me. I am sure curious to see how this dynamic plays out regarding whether the Mandalorian will turn the child in. Of course, we found this out in episode 3. I think we all know he will not. Did you see that the Imperial scientist had the Camino symbol on his sleeve? Someone pointed that out, and I can't help but speculate about what that might mean. Yeah, and in the Sin, in the 3rd episode, when the Mandalorian goes to get the child back, Chilota, you can hear some of the commentary there, and the scientist says, talks about the expectations of the person that wants whatever they're trying to get from Chilota. And the client says, just extract the materials that you need. Are they going down the midichlorian route? I really hope they are. And I hope this ties into the Rise of Skywalker. By the end of episode 2, we know the child is a powerful Force sensitive. And I can't help but think that this will all tie into some type of contingency plan set in place by Palpatine. I think this show may tell us how the ex-Imperials and possibly Palpatine as well were up to, what they were up to after Return of the Jedi. Could it be Palpatine rounding up Force-sensitive children for some purposes yet to be revealed? We did see something like this in the Clone Wars, tying the shows into movies will just make them all the more interesting to me. However, I think that may be a difficult thing to pull off. I have faith, though, that they will do a great job of it. Anyway, I can get more Star Wars, and I'm all here, and I'm here for all of it. If anything, this show has me more pumped to see the Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, I really am enjoying The Mandalorian. I really do. But I love all the different aspects of it. The Mandalorian feeds my nostalgia side of things. The Mandalorian feeds my, what does a disintegration look like? The Mandalorian feeds my, if we saw a Boba Fett in action, what would he be like? That's what The Mandalorian does. It gives you the nostalgic stuff. But that's why I also love the sequel trilogy, because we are getting new and different things. And I know for a lot of people, it's not probably pushed the boundaries as far as they'd like. Certainly didn't for George Lucas. I really think they're going to with The Rise of Skywalker. So I like what Disney and Lucasfilm are doing in providing the fandom with different aspects of all the things we love about Star Wars and really zeroing in on those particular ones. And when it comes to nostalgia and making something feel like Star Wars, The Mandalorian is definitely doing that. All right, friend of the show, Patrick, writes this. Love last week's show and your blast about The Mandalorian on the Blaster app. To pick up on the conversation that's been had the last couple of weeks about the movies on hiatus and Star Wars being put on Disney Plus, I have to say that I, like you, was excited for The Mandalorian, but I'm still more excited for The Rise of Skywalker. Having said that, I'm very impressed by what they have done, and as you mentioned last week, seeing as what HBO did with Game of Thrones, I figured they would be able to pull off a cinematic small-screen Star Wars story. But it was going to be about the story, and having Favreau and Filoni writing has helped in that. Having said that, I think, as you stated in my email last week on Disney's approach with the movies and advertising, I agree that they're still experimenting, and I have a feeling that the one thing they may have learned in these side stories like Solo, they should be told in this format, like The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan, Cassian Andor, and hopefully more of the Solo story. Having said that, I think putting off the advertising for The Rise of Skywalker may give Disney the false sense that they can do this again in a couple of years when they start their new saga, because The Rise of Skywalker is the end of the saga and is going to be popular regardless of The Mandalorian with Filoni. If they attempt to do this, and I think it could be damaging again like it was with Solo, I hope I'm wrong. I hope Disney will be smart and clear the deck for the new stories and properly give them the advertising they need and us, the fans, proper info to get us excited for the new story and saga. And I have to say that I agree with you that I wish we were back to a simpler time when we didn't have to worry about the fandom menace, worrying about all the gossip and the behind-the-scenes stories associated with Star Wars and using that to not only prop themselves and possibly their podcasts, YouTube channels up by putting Disney and Star Wars down. But like you said, just go and enjoy these movies and then dig into them and discuss and critique them about what is on the screen, not who wrote and directed it. And if we like or dislike said person, and don't have that color your opinions. Also, I have to make a parting comment that I find it really amusing of how the fandom menace dislikes the prequels because Lucas killed their childhood, but now they dislike the sequel trilogy because TFA was just a copy of A New Hope original trilogy and didn't have Luke in it, and TLJ ruined Luke Skywalker for them, and none of this would have happened if Lucas had just been writing and directing them. Sorry for the long email, but I wanted to cover all of that and get your thoughts. I hope I don't take up your whole email section with this email, friend of the show, Patrick. No, man, I wanted to read your comments, and I really liked them, and this was perfect timing to take us into the time frame that I wanted to do for the show this week. And look, I cover a lot of the background stuff on the stories, and I certainly did on this week's show. I'm kind of paring back a bit on my theories about the Rise of Skywalker and where we're going, simply because we're so close to the movie being released. I still want to talk about the Rise of Skywalker, but I really just want to use these last couple of weeks as a celebration of all things Star Wars and focus on that and not get too much into the mythology. So I like a little bit of looking at how the sausage is made with all of this. And I've done a much better job of ignoring the fandom menace. I've exercised my block. I've exercised my mute on YouTube. My mute on Twitter. I've exercised my I don't want to see videos like this recommendations on YouTube to make sure that I'm just getting the positive fandom aspect of Star Wars and not the negativity clickbait garbage that's out there. So thank you, as always, for listening, Patrick. I really do appreciate it. And to everybody who's written into the show this week. And with that, we will officially wrap the show up. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what you think of The Mandalorian so far. I'm glad they made The Mandalorian a TV show. I think it works perfect as a TV show. I think it has the right level of expectation. I have a nice little new tradition now of getting up early in the morning on Friday and watching it before I go to work, which I really enjoy, and I hope that will continue. They talked about potentially sort of reverse engineering The Mandalorian into a feature film. I think Alan Horn from Disney did. Don't do that. No, man, keep it on the small screen. Most of us have got great sound systems and TVs at home, and we're enjoying it just fine. Make those saga films and focus your attention on the big screens to those big saga movies. That's what Disney and Lucasfilm need to focus on, and I can't wait to see what they end up coming up with. All right, I've already said on where you can find me and what you need to go and check out and how to support the show. I just want to say thank you for checking it out. We'll be back again next week. Looking forward to hearing from you over the course of the next 7 days, and may the Force be with you, and here's Obi-Wan Kenobi.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.